welcome back, everybody, to the first Wheel of Convo of 2023. We hope your holidays were festive, merry, and bright. Back from our hiatus, this is Corey.
This is Joe. You're listening to the Wheel of Convo.
And tonight, we will be talking about a subject near and dear to both our hearts, cartoons and comics.
It's a subject that I have a plethora of knowledge on, absolute plethora. I have been collecting comic books since I was 5 years old. Over 30, actually almost 40 years of collecting comic books.
We were just discussing off air, as I think what makes this episode fascinating for the both of us is that we come from slightly different eras, consumed different cartoons. We dealt in comics differently. I was never really a collector. I had an uncle that was. I have a handful of comics, but I mostly just absorbed them from him. We grew up on different cartoons. So it's funny because it's funny how media changed even over the course of, the 10 to 12 years that is our age gap.
No, but it was a fine time, I think, for both of us. Especially, it's one of the things we do on this show is we usually look fondly back on childhood memories, and what more of a fonder childhood memory than sitting down watching your favorite cartoon show.
Those are great. And it's funny because people equate it with Saturday morning cartoons is the thing that gets equated. It's funny, I remember Snick in the 90s, which was the Saturday night Nickelodeon lineup. That wasn't all cartoons. That's something I recall from childhood, just as well as the cartoon lineup from the 90s on Nickelodeon, with the cartoons I grew up with. Rugrats, Doug, Real Monsters, Rocko's Modern Life, Ren and Stimpy, which I still don't know how that one made it on Nickelodeon. That was not for kids, and it snuck by, but it was there.
That was a glorious show.
Oh, Ren and Stimpy is fantastic. Yeah, I think it was meant for MTV at first, wasn't it?
It was.
Yeah.
It was, but Nickelodeon scapped it up.
But it didn't lose any of that sensibility, which is really strange looking back on it.
But you sit there and you take a look at that show, Ren and Stimpy. SpongeBob leans very heavy into almost that territory.
That's because, and some people, it's not as much of common knowledge as it is with Ren and Stimpy, but SpongeBob was actually the same thing. That was meant for MTV.
That I did not know.
Yes. SpongeBob was originally created for MTV. And if you have that knowledge going in, you can see a clear difference between its earlier episodes and the later it goes on. It orients itself more to kids the later it goes on. But that's another one, to be honest. Even though SpongeBob premiered when I was a teenager, I've seen every episode of SpongeBob, and I say that without shame.
And that's the one thing, though, too. It's like cross-generational, too, because my kids grew up watching SpongeBob, and every once in a while they'll sit there and they'll watch it again, but they lean heavily more towards the ones that they grew up with.
SpongeBob is the first 6 or 7 seasons. Like, I can watch those episodes now if I pass them on TV and be entertained. And this is, I guess, the case with a lot of cartoons that have staying power. And to be honest, shows that have staying power. The plots get more outlandish, right? More fantastical in nature. But it's funny because even though it was a cartoon, to me, part of what makes the early SpongeBob so good is how relatable the characters are. Which is almost weird to say for a cartoon, but I think it's true. And the reason that those later ones don't work as well is because the characters are almost caricatures of themselves, if that makes any sense at a certain point.
Oh, yeah, that makes perfect sense. But, you can't say cartoons without saying the granddaddy of them all. It would have to be The Simpsons.
Oh, yeah, obviously that's the creme de la creme. And I remember, growing up for me, right, The Simpsons is probably what people consider its peak. Happened from when I was like 5 or 6 when I was like 11 or 12. And my mom was one of those people who wouldn't let us watch The Simpsons because she didn't think it was for kids. I'm not saying she was wrong. I am saying I saw plenty of episodes because of my dad, however. That was a thing that happened. But that's kind of like, we're just talking about cartoons we love, but like the impact that had. Like, it's weird because what The Simpsons really is a animated sitcom, right?
Yeah.
It takes the classic sitcom format and puts it in a cartoon, which isn't really something that had been done or done well prior to that. The Simpsons created an entire genre, basically. And there have been 1,000 shows that tried to do what they accomplished.
Just like South Park, and then you had Family Guy.
King of the Hill, to an extent.
Yeah.
So King of the Hill is a fascinating one because they very much humanize their characters almost all the way through. Their characters are extremely realistic in nature.
You know, you sit there and you take a look at South Park, how every episode in a new season always had a relevant topic that was in the news or being buzzed about in popular culture. They would always sit there and show people how ridiculous it was.
Always marveled at how quickly they animate it. I mean, I guess the kind of choppy style helped, but like, if it was in the news, you could guarantee that South Park was addressing it within weeks.
Yeah. What was it? One of the election episodes where it was between a douchebag and a turd sandwich. That was probably one of my favorite ones.
Don't you know? It's always between a douchebag and a turd
sandwich.
As we've discussed many times on this podcast, actually. Just how far cartoons have come, too, as we are discussing more current ones. You think about the beginnings of cartoons, there were just like shorts for kids or little things for kids, Bugs Bunny and your Looney Tunes and stuff like that. And now, the fact that we can use cartoons and animation to tell any story, really.
Especially when I grew up, it was a major vehicle for all of the toy companies to sell their products.
Sure.
And, you know, from Transformers to GoBots to, you know, you name it, it had a TV show on it. He-Man and the Masters of the Universe.
That was my oldest brother. That was his all-time favorite. And he will still accept any manner of He-Man themed gifts around Christmas time or his birthday. He just loves He-Man. But no little He-Man. But yeah, G.I. Joe.
Oh, yeah.
All that stuff.
Talk about resurging a brand. Happened in the 1950s. Had the G.I. Joe with the Kung Fu grip. There was a doll that was the boy equivalent of Barbie, and they revolutionized the toy world by making them 3 3/4 figures.
And it's funny to think about. Like, it seems so ubiquitous now, but like using cartoons to give the toy life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now you could give it a personality. You could on adventures, and then you could have kids want to recreate the same things with their imagination. So it's incredible to me that it took as long as it did for toy companies to realize that the media opportunities, and then vice versa. You see plenty of vice versa too, where anything that gets popular in media has a toy line, right? Han Solo not dying in the original Star Wars trilogy to sell more toys, right? That kind of thing.
Yeah, because they could sit there and make like 15 different variants of them for Return of the Jedi.
Exactly. I mean, I love how far cartoons have come. I still love, I'll watch your Family Guy and your Simpsons, but it's just great now, though, that even companies like Pixar, I know we're talking about animated movies, but it's still in the same vein, how they're not afraid to use animation to tell any story at all. And just to think about how far that's come in just the span of even 30, 40 years.
Yeah, because I remember when I was, I would say from the age of 4 and up, they would always have, right before school started, they would have the almost like the season preview of what you were going to be watching on your Saturday morning cartoons, and they always did it the Friday of the first week of school to get everyone all jazzed up over it for that following Saturday morning, where they would tape it and you would see little previews of the cartoons they were going to show, just to get you all worked up, and they would put the schedule out there for you on the TV.
So I kind of I realized I omitted like a larger player when I talked about how The Simpsons kind of originated the cartoon as a sitcom.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really true. I left out the Flintstones, didn't I?
Oh, the Flintstones. You had the Jetsons. You had a wide range of them.
But it's funny because even that, right? Those are, they're before my time, but those are, looked back on fondly, right?
Mm-hmm.
People love them. My father did. My father was born in the late 50s, so he fondly remembered that. I think the Flintstones started in 1960. But even that, like, there's a little bit of a dead period for animation in between the end of those shows and when something like The Simpsons started. I'm not saying cartoons weren't being made, but that kind of like as an animated series other than a cartoon, because like the Flintstones kind of was an animated sitcom a little bit.
It was.
And that format kind of died out until The Simpsons brought it back, and now there's a 38,000 carbon copies of it. The Simpsons revived something that was dead. There was just it mainstreamed animation in a way.
It made it popular again, and that's the one thing that it was missing. Animation always goes through like these waves where it's either live action. They really go into live action because they're trying to keep up with the demographic. But when you sit there and you always count on a cartoon. Like you can sit there and talk to any person on the street and just take a poll. What is your favorite cartoon? And you would probably get in an hour's conversation talking to at least 60 people. You'd get probably anywhere between 30 to 40 different responses.
Yeah, that's because it is such a wide appeal. So many cartoons were made that appeal to various people for all kinds of reasons.
Oh yeah.
And it's like that's even more so than other media. Like, if you ask somebody who's my age what they think the best TV show of all time was, I can narrow that down to like a list of 10.
Yeah.
That people are probably going to give you. You can't do that with cartoons. And even you should think about even the rise of popularity of anime here in the States, on the stateside too.
Mm-hmm.
Just, again, using the vessel of cartoons and animation to tell all sorts of different stories. It's great to see it grow, because it's one of my favorite things growing up, and it remains so. Speaking of something that got, popularized, obviously the world of comics is 1,000 times different now than it was when you were growing up and going to the comic book shop every week and collecting them. In your eyes, what's better about that now and what's worse?
I don't think there's anything really better about it. When you sit there and you look at it, you'll have some artists that they have out there now that are doing a good job. I can't name any because I haven't really been into it for the past, I'd say, 10 years. I've really, what happened was it kind of turned me off because all they were doing was rehashing old storylines. Everything going through a continuity reboot and trying to get new readers and try to make it appealing to younger people by retelling stories that I've already read, but are told badly. It's almost like watching, a 3-minute video of your favorite movie, but acted very horribly by people that are butchering the dialogue.
Right. Do you think that the popularity of comic book movies, in the end, is it good or bad?
It's a double-edged sword because more people are getting into collecting comic books. The younger generation's collecting comic books now. It's not a niche thing anymore, where it was, before it was, you were called a nerd, a geek, a spaz because, oh, you're into comic books, you're one of those people. But now you sit there and it's gotten popular because of the movies. And but there are a couple times where you get surprised every now and then. When I got back into it probably real heavy in the 2000s because the stuff they were turning out was just amazing. It was, it was original stories, but you had people that were good at telling the stories about it, and they would sit there and dive deep into these characters and pull out these characters from the 60s and 70s that were absolutely bogus. Like one character was a bad guy called the Calculator. He basically wore a giant solar calculator as a costume in the early and mid 70s, and he was a Batman villain, but they made him like a computer hacker, so they reinvented him.
Okay, yeah.
But they put him into a different way where it worked in the modern time, and it wasn't some hokey, gimmick.
Well, I'm curious. I don't, comics, the paper comics themselves isn't really a thing that I follow or get into. But I've wondered if the popularity sort of doesn't spur that innovation that you're talking about. It's comfortably popular, so there's fewer chances being taken and that kind of thing.
But it's mass produced, so. That was one of the things too, where it was the scarcity was when you had a limited run and you only had so many issues. Next thing you know, it made it more sought after by the true collectors and the people that wanted to finish the story. And that was good. It happened the same way with baseball cards in the 80s when baseball card market started exploding. And the next thing you know, you had Don Russ, you had Fleer, you had Upper Deck, you had Topps, you had Bowman. They're all coming out now. You have like 18 different publishers of baseball cards sitting there trying to get in on the action.
You still have a Beckett? I still have Beckett.
Oh, now they have Beckett Online and you have to subscribe to it.
Oh,
to get access of their site.
Don Russ is what I collected.
But it's fascinating, and there was a lull before the superhero movie craze, before Marvel picked up. There was, the Spider-Man movies kind of kicked it into overdrive, but now everything is starting to become more mainstream, so they're just out there right now. They're just out there, and it's, they could basically do whatever they want and it's still going to sell thousands of copies.
I'll tell you, and this is coming from somebody who has watched basically every Marvel movie, and I'm going to tell you the thing I don't like as it relates to the comics and thus the original characters. Marvel has a very clear formula that they apply to their movies, which, a lot of franchises do, right? But they have an opportunity, because they have so many different characters, to tell slightly different stories, and they, for the most part, don't. They lean towards the more lighthearted, comic-infused style. And it works. They made it work for a bunch of the characters. But every once in a while, you kind of think to yourself, man, this would work better a different way. And as we've discussed with DC, they did the same thing but flipped it on its head. Origins of the characters be damned. It doesn't matter. So it's just proof that everything's gone formulaic.
Well, they homogenize it. They sit there and try to make it work for everybody, and everybody needs to like it, and everybody needs to do this. But that's, doing that though takes something away from the film itself, because then you have, you get people that sit there and are getting disinterested in the stuff because, I've seen it before. I've seen this type of movie before. Where did I see it? I understand they want to be more interconnected. but
Right,
it's
like,
just
don't like I get that tone that Marvel tries to strike.
Mhm.
Guardians of the Galaxy was the perfect movie for that tone, right?
Yeah.
It's probably the best example of the thing they've tried to do with all their characters. But then, because that works, you try to make Thor that too? Like, that's weird. Like, that's not who Thor is. Like, it's just odd. And
Like-
it would, like, we're not that far away from just having, like, one director be like, okay, the tone of this should be different. They did have that, I guess, once. They let Sam Raimi do his thing with Doctor Strange. But, even that, the first Doctor Strange movie was trying to fit him within the same template. The second one, they let Sam Raimi go nuts, which I do appreciate.
And the second one was a lot more. I preferred the second one more than the first one.
It's
for
almost
Doctor
a
Strange.
horror movie.
Yeah.
It's almost, which is saying something given everything that they constructed. It's almost a horror movie. But, I mean, I think we're looking at, like, I love that comics have gained in popularity because of the movies. It allows you, and the beautiful thing about comics is the range of stories using the characters as a base you're allowed to tell. I just wish we saw a little more of that range out of both companies, to be honest with you.
It's getting very stale.
Yeah.
And it's
Like, I remember when it went through its really most popular phase, I was like, oh, this is going to be just like anything else as far as movies go. It's more of a phase. Kind of like 3D movies were a phase. Or over-the-top action movies in the 90s were a phase, right? But this isn't really a phase. When you go on 20 years, what do you call it?
Yeah.
It's not a phase. They just print money now.
And that's the thing. Anything with their logo is printing money. But the thing is that they're sitting there saying that if anything has that movie logo where it has the Marvel Studios logo on it, automatically $1 billion. And that's the bad way of doing it.
Yeah.
Because then what happens is you start dumbing down everything, and everything just starts getting repetitive, and that's where people start getting lost.
Yeah, and I know that you are a fan of, more than anything, you're more of a DC fan than a Marvel fan. And bringing in James Gunn to correct Zack Snyder's mistakes. Yes, we can have a 3-hour podcast on those later if you want. But even that, you feel like that's going to yield the same tone. Like, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is a great idea, but now I feel like it also became the characters have to behave the same way within it, which is really odd.
Yeah.
Like, you can connect the movies and diversify the characters. You can do that.
But that's the one thing that they don't know how to do in DC, which is a shame, because DC, growing up collecting comic books, I collected both DC and Marvel. And, it was Superman's my man. You'll always be my man. Big Green Lantern fan. My older brother basically collected Batman. He was Batman fan. And, it was, they were well-written stories. And they were very cohesive. And they were very, character-driven. But those characters, when they came together, were still the same characters they were inside their own books. But the movies aren't like that. And one of the big things is that they're holding on to the past with how movies were made. Warner Brothers has always done that, where it needs to, it can only happen in one universe. It's one person, only one superhero is allowed in that world, and that's that superhero that we have on the screen, because no one else is important but that one. And Marvel basically put that on its ear, saying, you know what? No, there's more than one. There's more than one super person in here.
Yeah,
and
right.
Man of Steel was not supposed to be a franchise like a DC franchise movie. It wasn't. It sure didn't allude to it. You know, they did have little Easter eggs in it with, you know, Wayne Tech satellite and everything like that, but it wasn't supposed to be a franchise movie. It was never billed that way. And a lot of that stuff that they added was all post-production. You know, you take a look at...
You know, and we've discussed Snyder at length on the podcast. But the thing is, those two characters are probably the easiest characters to illustrate what we've been bouncing around. Like, Superman is they basically, what they did was they wrote a Batman movie for Superman.
Yeah.
Because they wanted everybody in their particular universe to be dark and brooding and Batman. But what they had, even more so than Marvel, they had two established characters who they could very much write different styles of film about, but they chose not to do that.
I think they rushed it too. You know, you can have Batman and Superman and possibly Wonder Woman in a movie, but develop the character first, you know?
Even Wonder Woman, right?
Yeah.
Like, you could... Wonder Woman, with the first Wonder Woman, is probably the most well put together, thought out movie in the DCEU, right? For lack of a better term.
Well, Aquaman was pretty good too.
Even
I have to say.
The final battle of Wonder Woman kind of cheapens all of that. It a little bit cheapens what happens before it. Because it goes for the big, bombastic, dark, brooding end, right?
Yeah.
And nothing in the movie prior to that genuinely set that up. I'm not so sure it had to either. Not so sure we had to have her face off with a god at the end. It didn't have to happen like that, but it did. I know that it's apart from, you know, it was before the DCEU or anything like that. But when people think about the Christopher Nolan Batman films, they think about, you know, Ledger's Joker and things like that. And obviously, why wouldn't you? But the strength of those movies is the world building inside of it. How Christian Bale doesn't just play Batman. He plays Bruce Wayne too. Like, Bruce Wayne is also a character, like a fully fleshed out character, and so is Batman. Like, it takes patience and commitment to pull that off. And patience and commitment's what was missing from the DCEU in general. Like, to use Man of Steel as an example, there's no, like, Clark Kent. I mean, I'm not saying Clark Kent's not there, right? But Clark Kent isn't really flushed out in Man of Steel.
No, and if anything, it features more of it's Clark being Superman. He's basically Kal-El.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's it. He's not even Superman. He's more Kal-El. So here you have this awkward person that sits there and is considered a freak because he's super strong. He's, you know, he can't get hurt. He could do these amazing things, but his parents, the people that are taking care of him, are afraid that someone's going to take him away. So they make him hide it until the time is right.
All of the charm that is derived in other Superman films and in Superman comics from Clark Kent as his own character is really missing in the Zack Snyder films.
Because there was no alter ego. It only faced the bad parts of being Superman. And it's the angst, and it's the always having to, you know, make sure that you're not showing off, making sure that you're not, you know, doing a bunch of different things. It was more of Smallville on steroids than anything else, because it where Smallville, you had the later seasons where he was the Blur and everything like that, and then next he's you don't see him fly until the last episode.
But you don't have to take what we're saying to heart, James Gunn, if you can hear us. But I think what we're getting at is you've got in Marvel, we like to see a little bit of this too. The character origins that come from the comics that we loved growing up, don't be afraid to use those to build your characters, to differentiate them from the other characters in your universe. Because, and like I sort of alluded to, Superman and Batman is kind of the easy example, right? The differences between them are obvious. The characters are very, very clearly drawn. But
well, you sit there and you look at the I would say probably the modern day equivalent of the blueprint of the modern superhero movie, and that would be the Richard Donner Superman. You sit there and you look at that actually showcased that character on a scale that if no one knew who Superman was, never picked up a comic book in their life, would actually sit there and be able to know, you know what, this is the person that's going to be Superman. Because what they did was, it was, I would say, 20 minutes to a half hour into the movie before you even saw him in the suit.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the way it was done was absolutely perfect. It didn't dwell on one period of his life. It just showed you the different parts of his life that led him to that. Him crash landing on the planet. Next, when he was a teenager, him having the conversation with Pa Kent, that leads to his heart attack and he dies, and the next he finds out who he truly is. Stuff like that. That is, it built up, and it not Pa Kent dying in a goddamn tornado.
We've talked about that multiple times. That's the problem with the movie, because and he dies of a heart attack in Smallville too, and they play it well. But the whole point of him dying of a heart attack in the comics and in any media where it did happen is that it shows Clark / Superman that no matter how powerful he is, he can't control everything. So
and that's
having him die in a manner in which Clark could have controlled that outcome sort of betrays the character growth that's supposed to come from his death. It cheapens the death.
There was no lesson learned.
Yeah.
And, it still shows that, life is precious, but
that's a blueprint. Honestly though, the modern superhero blueprint, probably the first Iron, because that's almost a case where a lot of what we're talking about actually kind of gets turned on its head, and it works anyway. That first Iron Man essentially turns Tony Stark into Bruce Wayne, but because of the strength that they played to the strength of the actor that they had, right? They had Robert Downey Jr. and they knew he could kind of do that smarmy, a little bit sarcastic, like very confident rich guy bit, right? So it worked. But that does do a good job of establishing the character outside of the suit. That movie does a great job of that. More so than even some other Marvel movies do. That's probably why it was a huge... Robert Downey Jr. got the biggest boost from Marvel. But.
Yeah. And, the other one I was very impressed with, too, from Marvel, first one out, was probably Captain America. That was an excellent origin story.
And because that very much that one kind of held to the comic roots.
Yeah.
More than anything. Iron Man doesn't particularly do that. They made that choice, though, with Cap, which was nice, and it worked out well. Plus, we don't get to see as much Tommy Lee Jones as we used to. So we got that too. But, so they're like, and that's the thing, because I guess Iron Man goes against what we were saying. But like, hold true to the origins of your characters, or give us one. Because the problem is that some of these movies don't. Like, Iron Man didn't particularly hold true to what we know that character in the comics to be, but they made it work. Problem with some of these movies that we're referencing is we're not really given an origin, are we?
No, it's almost, here you go. You didn't see us make the egg, but here's the you didn't see us bake the cake, but here's the cake. Just eat it.
Yeah, and like, I know that there's probably a segment of the audience that doesn't really care. They're there for the explosions and the action and that kind of thing. But what makes a franchise successful is characters that people can resonate with. And there's not really much.
And that's what made, out of all the Marvel movies, the one I would have to say that was probably, in my opinion, the best one was Infinity War. And the whole reason why it was a culmination of everything that was going on. And two, it was the main, you had Iron Man, Cap, all of them, but they were almost supporting players. The main person was Thanos in that movie. You followed Thanos around. He was the main character, and that actually worked for me because it made the story more feasible, because you were going from his perspective instead of all of the different superheroes and going from one to the other to the other to the other.
So there are two things at play there that I think work really well. One, you have those supporting players you're talking about are characters that the audience already cares about.
Mm-hmm.
So that's good, because you've established a scenario where they care about the characters involved. And I think this is what you're alluding to with what you just said. Not only is Thanos the main character, they don't paint him with a broad brush.
No. He's not the villain archetype that is in most of the movies, which was refreshing.
His plan, I'm not saying that you root for him, right? But you get it. You get it. His plan makes sense. You could almost say it will do some good, believe it or not. Like, they justify his actions, which is not something that a lot of, movies in general, but especially comic book movies, take the time to do for the most part. You could almost argue his plan's justified. Almost.
Going back to the cartoons one, I would be, since we're talking about cartoons and comics, and there's one person that, passed away recently that was the voice of Batman, not only in the animated series, but, Batman Beyond is the old Bruce Wayne. He did all of the Justice League Unlimiteds, which were amazing. Kevin Conroy, he passed away.
He did my experience with him comes from the Batman Arkham video games,
mm-hmm.
which were a better piece of media than they had any right to be.
And if anyone has seen the CW Crisis on Infinite Earths, he was actually Bruce Wayne in that one of the episodes, and he played Batman. Awesome. And
it's amazing, even so, like just what voice work can do for a character too, because to me, actually, it's not. I guess it's not a cartoon or a comic, but those video games are a great example. And I know he did it in cartoons too. He's great in the video game. You feel like Batman. You're up against Mark Hamill's Joker, and it's all just it's amazing that you feel like they brought characters more to life than something you'd see in a movie. How did they do this in a cartoon or in a video game? With just a voice, how were they able to do that? It's unbelievable.
Well, you sit there and you look at it, though, because you grew up on Batman the Animated Series, and those two people were basically the voices of that show, Mark Hamill and Kevin Conroy. And what they did was they merged that into a video game, and that made the experience a lot more familiar to everybody that watched those. So it was almost like you already knew what Batman sounded like. You already knew what the Joker sounded like. It was like, you know what, this is familiar. This is nice. It was almost like a nice little aesthetic thing where you could just sit there and ease you into the game.
I know you're not much of a gamer anymore there, dude. Did you get a chance to play those games?
I did. I played the first Arkham, and it was really good. It reminded me of Metal Gear Solid.
Because the first Arkham is just like, that's the most self-contained of the trio.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I don't know about you, but I just felt like we were going through a moving comic book. And the little nods to some of the smaller characters, the Scarecrow nightmares in that game are incredible. Like,
They are.
They did the little characters a lot of justice too. You should probably go back and play the second one, because as a game that's even better if you can somehow get your hands on it. But
was that Arkham City?
Yeah. But that's the cool part that I think video games allow for and comics allow for that maybe the movies do not. The chance to flush out smaller characters or introduce new characters and kind of test them out and see where they go and play with it, right? That kind of thing. Like, that's the thing. I'm like I kind of alluded to before. I wonder if we're missing out on innovation because of popularity.
That is one thing, but I would like to know who you think is the most overrated and underrated superhero.
Most overrated superhero in terms of like what, power or just like popularity or
just
what?
You have no idea why they're as popular as they are.
Aquaman.
Aquaman?
And it's because you can't call somebody powerful if it's just like, yep, I'll take care of you as soon as you get in this ocean. As soon as you get in this ocean, we'll have a problem. If you stay away from this ocean, nothing will happen. So it's just weird to me to have somebody like so confined to a very certain piece of land. Like, how powerful can you really be?
Yeah.
It would be like if I was Vacuum Man, and I had incredible superpowers as long as I was within 20 feet of a vacuum cleaner. Well, that seems pretty solvable if I was a villain.
And what do you think your most underrated superhero is?
Underrated, and it's funny because it almost feels like it's a rip-off superhero. I guess a little bit is. Moon Knight.
Moon Knight, all right.
Moon Knight is essentially, if we want to be honest, it's Marvel's Batman is Moon Knight, basically. But he's just great. And, like, especially some of those early comics, the way they're drawn, it's fantastic. The show was pretty good. Better than I thought it would be with Oscar Isaac. And he's just a great character that I wish we could flesh out more. I guess the show is doing that. Also, if you ever happened to play the Zen Pinball video games, they had a bunch of Marvel licensed tables. His table was freaking awesome. I'm just saying. What about you, Joe? Give me the same thing.
Most overrated Superman? Not Superman. Scratch that. That is the all-time favorite, best one. But the overrated one, I would have to say, would be Wolverine.
Okay, and I can accept that answer. Do you think it just had to do with? You think Hugh Jackman just made it really popular?
It was even before Hugh Jackman. He always seems overpowered. How can you sit there and defeat a person who has unbreakable bones and can heal?
That's true.
It's kind of, you can cause a lot of damage, but don't worry, in the next panel he'll be healed. It was one of those.
I do want to point out now, though, now that you brought it up and made me think of it, we talked about Marvel movies having a template.
Yeah.
Whoever at Marvel gave James Mangold the okay, though, to make Logan, thank you.
Yeah.
Because every rule I just talked about, it broke them all. Broke every last one of them. And it's fantastic.
And the most underrated superhero is one of my all-time favorite superheroes of all time, and that would be Booster Gold.
All right. Go on. I don't know too much, so enlighten me too while you're at it.
So Booster Gold was a football player in the distant future who got caught not cheating, but betting on his games and throwing his games. So he got kicked out, and he stopped playing football, and then became a janitor at a science museum, where he took a time bubble back in time and took a security robot that had all of the information about the past with him, and he got a flight suit, and he got a Legion of Superhero ring, and he went back in time, and he was sitting there, and he made his fortune. And it was a superhero that had it was like a NASCAR outfit. He had badges of all of his sponsors on it, so whenever he hit the news after he saved anybody, he would be hawking merchandise. It was absolutely fabulous character.
That sounds like some sort of meta,
yeah,
delirious good time is what it sounds like. Sounds like they made Biff Tannen into a superhero.
Yeah, and the best part about it was in the 2000s when I started picking it up again, they started trying to make him mainstream, and the tagline on his book that they brought back out for him was Booster Gold, the greatest superhero you never heard of, because it fleshed out that he was supposed to give off that persona because this way people didn't think he was actually trying to help people and fix the timeline.
Okay, so we need this to happen. This needs to be a movie. Got to be a thing. We need it to happen.
There was an episode of Smallville that had him on it.
Oh, see, I watched all of Smallville. I don't recall.
It was one episode,
and
it was called Booster. And if you have a chance to watch it on YouTube, the guy who played him was absolutely fabulous. He almost reminds me of like Bradley Cooper, and it was fabulous.
Sounds pretty fabulous. I think Joe's on to something here, guys.
DC growing up was always my favorite publishing house. They always had one of these great, big, massive, multi-universal events where everybody and their mother and their sister and brother would sit there and all join up and have to go against the common threat. And it was like 3 months of comics during the summer where you could just buy. And they would sit there and try and make you buy all 25 books at the same time.
Right.
It was fabulous. Fabulous money grab. But it actually drew you in.
And also they had Frank Miller. So there's that.
Well, each Marvel and DC had Frank Miller.
Yeah, but he's more known for his DC work, I would say.
No, not really, because Daredevil, he did
that is true.
Quite a few Daredevils.
That is true.
What was it? One person that doesn't get enough credit in the comic book world, or if he does, still doesn't get enough, is Alan Moore. Have you ever read anything written by Alan Moore?
Watchmen, isn't it?
Watchmen, V for Vendetta, and in the late 80s, he did a run on Superman. He did one of the last issues before they rebooted it, and he called it Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, where it showcases the final battle Superman had.
Okay.
Absolutely epic book. And it turns out, now if I was to say, Corey, who would you think would be the person that Superman would go toe-to-toe with for his final battle? Who would you think it would be?
Some sort of superpowered Lex Luthor?
No. Well, he's in it.
I'm sure he is, obviously.
He merged with Brainiac.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I think they did that in one of the video games.
Yeah. He actually sat there and he used Mr. Mxyzptlk.
Yeah, because he can do anything he wants. So
and it turned out his true form. He was like this electric being, and he was sitting there and he was going to kill Superman. It was great.
Dan, and going back, because I know how much Joe loves Zack Snyder. Watchmen was the only thing that they ever gave to Zack Snyder that perfectly fit what he likes to do.
It perfectly fit, but it was missing a lot.
It was missing a lot. That was gonna be something that was hard to convey the whole thing. I think even with the stylistic flair, I think that's a great movie. It's something that hopefully made people go read the graphic novel because they should. But Watchmen is pretty fantastic. If Rorschach got his own movie, I'd be okay with it.
The one thing, though, that threw me for a loop, and it was absolutely fabulous. Did you watch the HBO miniseries, The Watchmen?
It didn't do it for me.
But I thought it was great because it wasn't a retelling. It was like after The Watchmen.
So that I appreciated. I appreciated that they tried to go a different route, but it didn't work for me. I know it worked for some people. It didn't work for me.
I thought it was absolutely fabulous the way that he did that. And kudos for that guy, too, because I think it was Darren Lindhoff, wasn't it?
Yeah, the guy who did The Leftovers.
And he basically, when they were asking him, when's the next season of Watchmen? And he goes, I don't know, but I'd like to see it. And they're like, what do you mean? You didn't sign up for it? He goes, no, I already told my story. Someone else can take a turn. And that is the great thing about it. And if you look at it, Zack Snyder had his chance with the actual graphic novel, and then he took his chance after. And if another director wants to produce or do something like that and become a showrunner, I would have no problem with that. The whole reason why is because you watched or read all of the other stuff. Now, what would happen after? That's up to you. You have carte blanche to do whatever you want. That is what's missing with a lot of these things. And
with comics in general, yeah. We can have different interpretations of these characters, even running concurrently. That's fine.
But you sit there and you look at what the CW tried to do with the superhero genre, too. It started off with Arrow, then Flash, and then they started loading things up. And now it's like teetering off to obscurity. But, the Flash per season? Man.
I'm going to go ahead and just throw out another little sidebar here. Because I guess it's just some weird things that have happened, even with the popular. Like we talked about Guardians, right? And how great that was, right? But you know what that should have been? The Fantastic Four.
It should have been.
How the heck have they not gotten the Fantastic Four right yet over at Marvel?
The one thing that was missing from it is, and it's going to be a hard sell because Fantastic Four was always billed as the first family of Marvel. And it was one of the first incarnations of a teen superhero. It actually I think it predated the Avengers. But it was a group of superheroes, and they ushered in the superhero age. But my God, man, if they do that right, and if they get the right thing, that would be an absolutely phenomenal movie. But one of the things was that technology wasn't on their side. They couldn't do the same thing that they were doing on paper. That it wouldn't have been believable.
Here's a couple things too, right? The Fantastic Four are great on their own. It possesses maybe my favorite character in all comics is the Silver Surfer. And I know they tried that with the second version of the Fantastic Four movies in the 2000s. Plus, it has its own Thanos-esque being, Galactus.
Yeah.
We just need Galactus. That's what we need. We need Galactus and we need the Silver Surfer.
But I heard that there was a rumor online that they're going to do a Disney Plus show as a lead-in to the Fantastic Four movie for the Silver Surfer.
I love me the Silver Surfer.
This way you flesh out Galactus, you flesh out Silver Surfer, and then next have them meet in the first Fantastic Four movie.
Yeah, no, that could work.
Because I think they're holding Doom back for Secret Wars.
Also, can I just if we're allowed to cross between DC and Marvel, can I just possibly put out there John Cena as either the Human Torch or the Thing? Frankly, either one.
Yeah.
He could do either of it.
I don't see him as a good Human Torch. I think he's too old. I think he'd be better off as a Thing.
He'd be better off as the Thing, probably.
Yeah, because he's got the build for it. so they can motion capture nice. And he could actually do I could see him being the voice of the thing.
Yeah.
Not
and it's
Johnny
okay
Storm.
if you want to make him like a little bit funny. That's okay. We can do that.
Because he plays off well against everybody that he's with.
That's the thing, is the Fantastic Four actually can fit well into that little bit funny kind of template that Marvel loves.
Oh, yeah.
It fits well in there. So I can't believe they haven't gotten it right yet. I don't know who to cast in the other roles. I could try to fantasy cast it, but basically I just want to see John Cena in there.
I heard there was rumors that The Rock is trying to push to go to a Marvel. He might be the thing.
That's also fine. He can do that too.
I can totally see him doing that.
All right, you want to just get all the wrestlers turned actors in there?
Yeah.
Let's get them all in there. So I had that debate the other day. Who's the best wrestler turned actor of the big three that are out there now? But The Rock is at the bottom of that list, even though he's the biggest one.
Cena's funny.
Cena has superb. I'm talking A+. Even if we're just talking about regular actors, he has some of the best comedic timing. Period.
Yeah.
Bar none.
And he's not afraid to do anything.
He's not. And Batista just has the most range. He has a lot of range. Like, he's actually a decent actor, if that makes any sense. And he's done some stuff that has more range. The Rock is essentially just an action star, though I know he's got the comedy chops, but he's basically just an action guy. Black Adam was a misfire.
Oh, man. I wanted that movie to do so well.
It's hard to do, like, I don't know, it's hard. Like, I appreciate that they essentially tried to do an origin movie for a villain, right? But
yeah.
Can you base a movie franchise around a character you're supposed to root against?
That's why it was a misstep not having him in Shazam first.
Yeah. So, now if he goes over to Marvel and they do it right, that can work too.
But, brightest part of Black Adam, Pierce Brosnan is Dr. Fate.
Yes.
I don't care who disagrees with me, but that was the role that he was meant for, besides James Bond in the 90s. But
he's a mid-range James Bond. He's not great. He's not awful though. But he also wasn't given the best scripts, if we're being honest.
No, he wasn't.
No. He's fantastic in a movie called The Ghost Rider, though, from about 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Not comics or anything related. He's just great in it. Wanted to shout him out.
Thomas Crown Affair. He was awesome.
Yeah. Yep. So this has turned into a we like Pierce Brosnan.
Yes. We heart Pierce Brosnan.
We do. We're Pierce fans. It's also just a great name.
That's right.
Fantastic.
And I did like Remington Steele.
There you go. So he was great in there. I just hope they get the Fantastic Four right at the end of the day.
I thought Krasinski would have made a perfect Reed Richards, but I don't think there's any hope for him because he was in Multiverse of Madness.
That actually would have worked out really well. That's a good idea.
And they were fan casting him as Reed Richards and his wife Emily Blunt as the Invisible Woman.
Emily Blunt, who knows? But who knows? I guess it could have worked. Him as Reed Richards, though, is almost perfect. It's almost too good.
So who knows?
Yeah, who knows? Let's just hope.
But some of the toys from that movie that people were creating online were absolutely hilarious. Where they had Multiverse of Madness John Krasinski as Reed Richards, and it was just like blue spaghetti. And it was great. I was like, oh man. I almost bought that for my other daughter. She's like a big Marvel head. And she watches all of the shows. She watches all of the movies, like on repeat. And
Multiverse of Madness made me so happy. Because when you heard about it, you were like, if you know anything about Sam Raimi, if you love movies,
yeah,
like you know that Sam Raimi is. Some people know him as the Spider-Man guy, which is fine. I know him as the Evil Dead guy, right? And a lot of people do.
Yeah.
But you were like, there's no way they're going to let him essentially make Evil Dead with Marvel characters. And then they just went ahead and let him do it.
I'm sorry, but probably one of the best lines of the whole movie is, how can you stop them? You're not even there. I'm not there, but I know who is. And then the dead Doctor Strange comes out as a zombie. I'm like, no way! I was like, this is a great movie.
So good. I just couldn't believe I couldn't believe they gave him the free reign to do it.
Yeah.
It was great, though. God, I'm gonna watch that as soon as we end this podcast.
My daughter watches it on repeat she was off for winter break, and she watched it every night.
Your daughter's got good taste there, Joe.
Big Scarlet Witch fan.
Uh-huh.
But if you are into zombies and if you are into horror movies, there is one comic book arc for the Green Lantern that you need to read. And you could probably go, it's freecomicbook.org or readcomicbooks.com or something like that. I forgot the name of it. I'll get you the link. I'll post it too, where you could actually read comic books online for free. And it was called Blackest Night, because you know the whole oath that the Green Lantern says, right? Yep. Brightest day and darkest night, no evil shall escape my lantern's light.
Yes.
And so the one writer that they had, Jeff Johns, restarted the whole Green Lantern basically franchise, and based off of his comic books that he put out, actually in the popularity, that's why the Green Lantern movie got made.
Right.
And it was the most absolutely fabulous reading from start to finish, from issue 1 of the Green Lantern when they rebooted it, all the way through until probably issue number 50, until he ended his arc, where he basically had the emotional spectrum war, where the emotional spectrum is like the visible light spectrum.
Right.
So you had green, which is the power of will, and yellow, which is the power of fear, and orange, which is the power of greed. And you had all of those different ones. And what they did was they brought back all of the people that died, and they would be able to get a Black Lantern ring. And so you had all of the heroes that died come back as Black Lanterns, and they were like zombified. And they would sit there and start like killing all of the other people. It was absolutely fabulous.
Sounds fun to me.
Yeah, but it was a good read. Good read.
While we're mentioning zombies, again, this is off topic. If there's any chance we could get a sequel to 28 Weeks Later, Danny Boyle, if you could take care of that for me, that'd be great.
Oh, man.
That's the best of the anything modern on zombies. Those two movies were the best.
Just remember, it's 28 weeks, not 28 days. If you watch Sandra Bullock and Viggo Mortensen, in 28 days, you probably become a zombie.
There's 28 days later, too. That was first.
All right.
Just remember to look for later.
Yeah.
Even though the whole plot of that movie, the whole plot of the second movie should be completely avoided, but it's not. Yeah. That's like the Indiana Jones thing, but we won't go there.
I'm serious. When we redo the wheel, I think we're going to have to just do one topic is just going to be zombies.
We can do that.
And we could do research on it and like get the federal plan for if a zombie apocalypse ever happens.
Where the origins of the zombie as a character originate?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. I vaguely mentioned it a second ago. Now I feel like I need to rant about it, even though the Big Bang Theory is where it came from. Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. Indiana Jones is meaningless in that movie. I just want to put it out there. And anybody who loves that movie the way I do as well, it is maybe the biggest plot hole in the history of film.
I heard a rumor that they were going to go full on that theory in the next movie.
It might be one of the only things that would make me watch it, because I hated
the Dial of Destiny originally, and reason why they went through so many reshoots and so many redos was initially they wanted to erase Indiana Jones from history, and everything would still be the same as it was because he had no. He was meaningless.
What he does in Raiders of the Lost Ark does not change the film in any way. If he is not in the movie, it plays out the exact same way.
Same thing could be said for Crystal Skull.
Yes. Well, yeah.
And same could be said if it was for Last Crusade.
If they have the guts to try it, we talked about in a previous episode about retconning things. If they have the guts to turn that movie into a retcon, to try to make all of that fit, they would get my money.
Because I'm like, wow, that actually would be a really... that would make me giggle. It's like, yes, you watched this character for 30 years and we erased him from history. I can just see the trailer now.
It would be very meta. It would be extremely meta.
They could sit there with the John Williams theme going backwards, like one of the Beatles albums.
Spielberg, do this for us.
Do this.
Please.
Hear us.
Hear us. Right. I think that tangent's a good place to wrap this one up.
And then have Lucas buy all the prints of Raiders of the Lost Ark and let them be gone forever, too.
Sounds like something he would do.
He would. But now it is time for the wheel. We're going to spin the wheel. We got 2 spots left. What will they be?
We're going to get through those final 2 spots and then build a new wheel. One of those conversations on the new wheel will be zombies, as we just discussed.
And it looks like it's going to be
toys
and video games.
So we actually discussed both those things briefly in this episode, but video games especially. That was, and it still is, my hobby of choice. So this is great for me, and I don't know, like, how much you game less now than you used to, right? But growing up, you gamed a fair amount.
I started with the Atari 2600. Some of my achievements in the gaming world is I beat Legend of Zelda on the Nintendo Entertainment System with 1 life because I had no life, as people can see from documenting on this podcast. So, but no, it's some great times had video games.
That will certainly be a fun episode for us both.
I will chronicle that one summer when I was alone, lonely, and got Star Wars Old Republic for the Xbox.
Yes. Fantastic.
I beat that game so many times, and the only reason why I did it was because it was almost like a choose your own adventure.
Yeah, very open.
It was, and you could sit there and you could tell what path you were doing based on the character's portrait on the bottom of the corner where your health bar was. And I got him so evil one time where he was like stark white with like yellow eyes. And I was like, this is so cool. Just like killing everybody with force lightning. Anytime that, hey, what are you?
And I believe this episode will have a special guest, will it not?
We're going to try and get a special guest for this because one of the topics with video games, you can't say video games without saying Pokemon. So we'll have someone on that's very knowledgeable about Pokemon.
And it's not my area of expertise, so I'm happy to let our guest take over.
So she is wealth of knowledge, a professor in Pokemon. I'm just going to have to find out what type of tree she's going to be named after. So that concludes our episode of the Wheel of Convo. Hopefully you had a great time listening to us rant and rave about cartoons and comics.
Just as we usually do, in 2023, with the style and flair only we can.
That's right. So everybody have a good night, and we'll see you soon.
That's all, folks.